Hello, gorgeous. I'm Tara. Welcome back to the Tara Kinden audio experience. If you are new here, I'm really glad you found your way in. And to my OGs, of course, welcome back. I love having you in my space. Before we dive into today's conversation, I want to just take a second to settle our shoulders, to maybe unclench our jaws. Let's take a deep, big and settle in. If you've got a tea or a coffee, go grab it. If you are driving, please just soften your grip on the wheel. This space is designed to feel like a weekly exhale where you get to be cozy, you get to be casual. And if you don't have many spaces like this where you can have beautiful conversation, real ones, intelligent ones, grounded ones, you can come and land right here. I work in what I like to call bioenergetic somatics. And what this really means is that we look at how the identity and nervous system patterns organize in our physical bodies because over responsibility doesn't just live in thought patterns, it settles into our physical being, in our posture, our breath, our tone, our shoulders, our organs, our baseline level of activation. It becomes electrical patterning in the body. And if the nervous system is electrical, which it is, then the way we carry responsibility, suppression, vigilance, that becomes stored charge. Okay, it has to go somewhere. So when we talk about letting go, we're not just talking about psychologically, we're talking about physiologically. Most women do not need more information. They need the integration. They need to be able to find ways to discharge, to find coherence, that they are able to reorganize the system. And this week, I want to build on a conversation we started around the topic of letting go. Because I don't think actually letting go is the hardest part. I think the hardest part is this: over responsibility has become an identity for so many. And when identity begins to shift, at first that does not feel relieving. It actually feels quite destabilizing. So today we're going to look at that in a slower, methodical way. Not in a preachy way, not in a dramatic sense, but just honest, real conversations around this particular topic. At some point in your life, being capable became who you are, not just what you do, but who you are fundamentally. And you're the one who handles it, who fixes it, who hosts it, who pays for it, who remembers it, who stabilizes it. And maybe you are proud of this, and you should be. However, when responsibility moves from role to identity, stepping back no longer feels like rest. It actually feels like you are erasing part of who you are. And that's why letting go can feel so unsafe. Not because you're weak, because your nervous system equates holding everything with stability. And here's where it gets quietly uncomfortable. And I just want you to notice what is happening in your body as we go through this part. Okay. So, have you ever arrived somewhere, maybe a dinner, a family gathering, a work meeting, or even in a relationship? Like you show up, and before you've even sat down, you are scanning. You are reading the room, you are noticing the tone, you're anticipating who might need something. You're calculating in your mind how you can keep things smooth, okay? Even in your own life, even in spaces that are supposed to be designed to hold you. That's not personality, that's a pattern. And often no one explicitly asked you to do this. It's just something you started to do, right? No one handed you the role and said, hey, can you be responsible for everyone else's emotional stability, please? But no one ever stopped you from doing that either. And slowly, very creepily slowly, something structural began to form. You give, others receive. You organize, others show up. You host, and others attend. You pay, others assume. You anticipate, others relax. Not maliciously, because people are not fundamentally evil, just incrementally. And here's the part that most strong women that I get a chance to work with miss. Reciprocity is not about fairness, it's about nervous system relief. Reciprocity means there is at least one space in your life where you get to arrive and your body doesn't need to brace itself before it enters the doorway, where someone else steadied the ground for you, where you're not emotionally regulating everything, where you're not having to plan it, where you're not the one who's having to smooth out the tensions. You just get to land. And if that space doesn't exist for you, the body is keeping a ledger. Okay. So, not consciously, not dramatically, but electrically, because your nervous system is constantly mobilizing, anticipating, scanning, managing. That is a charge. It's an electric charge. And if that charge doesn't get discharged, it begins to accumulate. It becomes subtle resentment. It becomes fatigue you can't quite explain. It becomes that moment in the car afterward where you think, why am I always the one doing this? Or you want to scream into the abyss. And then you tell yourself, oh, you're being dramatic. You're being too much. You're being over the top. You are not. Your system is noticing the imbalance. And here's something even more subtle. Sometimes the imbalance is not about money. It's not about the chores. It's not about who cooked, who cleaned. It's about emotional labor. And it's about who is holding the tone of the room, who is carrying the invisible weight. And if that's always you, your body knows, your shoulders know, your jaw knows, and your gut knows. Because reciprocity isn't philosophical, it's physiological, your nervous system relaxes only when it feels supported. And it kind of braces itself when it feels solely responsible for everyone and everything. Friends, again, this is not personality, this is electricity. Okay, so here's the part where we're going to require a little self compassion because you didn't choose imbalance consciously. You were probably building something, and maybe you grew up with a lot of instability. Maybe you wanted to be that safe house that you didn't have, or maybe you didn't want anyone to feel what you felt. Early adulthood is a time for autopilot. It's like we're building, we're pushing, we're creating, we're proving, we're expanding. We don't ever pause to ask, like, is this reciprocal? Is this even sustainable? Is this even mine to be carrying? Because we're so busy surviving and stabilizing our lives. And capability becomes currency. As you get rewarded for it, that becomes more of a trap. And then something shifts, not in a dramatic kind of way, not all at once, but really decisively. Midlife isn't a time of collapse, it's a time where we get very, very honest. It's the moment that your body refuses to override itself anymore. And for years, sometimes even decades, you were able to push through, right? You could host, you could manage, you could do the smoothing, you could say, it's fine. You could swallow it and you could just stay because you had more capacity for the BS, if you will. But because you were building, because you were proving, potentially you were still striving, but that nervous system just can no longer override for an indefinite period of time. Eventually, the body catches up and says, no more. It doesn't say it loudly at first. It says it through a bit of tolerance, and then your tolerance begins to drop. Your patience shortens, your ability to pretend decreases, your resentment becomes so visible Not because you became more, bitter, but because you just stopped suppressing the signal. And this is where a lot of women get scared. They think, oh my God, like I'm becoming difficult. I'm losing my edge. I'm not as capable as I used to be. They start spiraling from the inside. But what's actually happening is the system, it's reaching its electrical max. And there's just no more room inside of it to store this immense amount of charge. There's no more space to keep overcompensating. So the body chooses honesty over harmony. Honesty feels destabilizing. There's that word again. We're in a lot of destabilization because when that awareness arises, the old structures begin to wobble. So you start asking questions you never let yourself ask before. Why am I always the one who's organizing? Why am I the one covering this again? Why am I the one smoothing the tension? And why does this feel so much heavier than it used to? And here's the honest truth: if it feels heavier because you're no longer dissociating from the cost, right? That's not any kind of regression, that's you beginning to recalibrate. And midlife is not the breakdown of strong women, it's the breakdown of silent over functioning. And it's the moment where strength gets to reorganize, not from endurance, but actually from feeling alignment. And that shift from endurance to alignment feels like instability before it ever feels powerful. And this is the part that most women do not want to talk about, okay? Because when you begin to pull back, you don't just feel a sense of relief, you feel guilt. And not light guilt, like super heavy, consuming kinds of guilt. The kind that tightens in the chest, the kind that makes your stomach drop, the kind that whispers, who do you think you are? Because for years, your identity was built around being dependable. So when you stop answering people immediately, that silence feels so loud. It's like so amplified. When you don't fix it, the room starts to feel a little awkward, a little strange. And when you don't host, the expectation hangs in the air. And suddenly you feel like the villain, not because you did something wrong, but because the system now has to reorganize around your inability to be that reliable person. You were the regulator. So when that regulator steps down, it's got to redistribute somehow. And redistribution always creates discomfort because that is the wobble in the system. It's not proof you're wrong, it's proof you were holding way more than your share. Now, let's go a little deeper for fun because guilt doesn't just live in thought, it lives in the body. And in Chinese medicine, the liver is associated with anger, the gallbladder is associated with courage and decision making. So when frustration gets swallowed for years, decades, when resentment never gets expressed, when you keep smoothing instead of speaking, I mean, you get issues in the lump in the throat, this kind of thing, that energy doesn't disappear. It turns inward. It becomes tension. It becomes irritability. It becomes indecision. It becomes fatigue, exhaustion. It becomes that low grade edge you sometimes can't even name. This energy was meant to move outward, but it stayed internal and it never got a chance to discharge. And here's something fascinating: it's like between the hours of 1 and 3 a.m. in traditional Chinese medicine, the liver is the most active. It's when it's supposed to be processing. So when women wake in that window, like who hasn't woken during that time with your mind racing, your body tight, replaying conversations over and over again, it's often not random. This is the overload, it's the processing, it's the accumulation trying to metabolize, trying to digest those emotions. And if the system is already saturated, that processing feels overwhelming. So guilt becomes the override because guilt keeps you compliant. Guilt keeps you agreeable. Guilt keeps you over functioning. And the sick cycle continues. But guilt also jams your authority and prevents you from being able to make clear decisions. So if every decision triggers shame, you can't say no. Even if your body equates no with abandonment, you can't access courage if your gallbladder, metaphorically and energetically, has been suppressed for decades. So, what it looks like is just that I'm tired. I'm just overwhelmed. I must be just emotional. But it's often stored frustration and anger and maybe even a little rage. It's electric charge. And when you begin to reclaim this space, that stored energy gets to move. And the movement can feel destabilizing. But movement is not about finding ourselves in a sense of collapse. Movement is almost like permission to discharge what's been stuffed and stored in the body for such a long time. This is where the bioenergetic somatics matter because this conversation isn't just psychological. If over responsibility was only a belief, you could literally read a book and be done with it. But it's not just a belief, this is a pattern. And patterns wire into our nervous systems. And when you've overfunctioned for years, your system organizes itself around that vigilance. If you've lived slightly braced, if you've been that person who's always slightly anticipating, slightly scanning, even at rest, your baseline isn't panic, it's subtle readiness. So when someone says to you, just relax, just let go, just set a boundary, your body is not going to comply with that, not because you're not willing, but because your physiology has been structured around regulation. You became the regulator. Your nervous system learned, okay, well, if I hold everything together, we are going to be safe. That wiring is electrical. Your nervous system communicates through electrical impulses. The heart generates an electromagnetic field. The brain emits measurable frequency. Like, this is facts. You are not metaphorically wired in this way. You are literally wired this way. And when identity organizes itself around responsibility, that wiring becomes your baseline. So, when you begin to redistribute this responsibility, your system feels kind of naked, a little exposed before it ever feels a sense of freedom. And that exposure can feel like anxiety or guilt or heat, restlessness, like tingling, emotional waves, a deep exhale, unexpected stillness. That's not random. That's the charge reorganizing itself. And this is where bioenergetic somatics gets to come in. Because what we work with is not just the mindset, we work with patterning and completion. That stored charge, the unfinished activation, all this electrical load that never got discharged. And when a woman comes into a session with me, she often says, like, I don't feel much in my body. I'm fine. My upbringing, things weren't that bad. But as we slow things down, there is heat, there is vibration, there is sensation beginning to return. And there's a deeper breath than she's ever taken in years because she's not holding and digging for trauma. Her nervous system finally feels free enough to relax and reorganize. We're reintegrating the energy, and it's very precise. We're creating a condition where the body can discharge what it never got a chance to complete. So instead of forcing courage, clarity begins to emerge. Instead of convincing yourself you've got to change, your system stabilizes into a beautiful new baseline. And after that, she doesn't just feel relaxed. She actually has the power to send the email, to have the conversation, to stop over explaining. If she wants to say no, she just says no. She raises her prices and she gets to choose differently. That's not a mindset trick. That's an electrical reorganization creating courage. Regulation creates clarity. Clarity creates that courage. And courage reorganizes your life. And that's the difference. And so at this point in our conversation, here's what is true: you can keep going. You can keep on holding, you can keep on organizing, you can keep absorbing and overriding. You are capable. That is not the issue. The issue is the amount of accumulation of this charge that has never had a chance to discharge, responsibility that never feels like it gets to be redistributed, and frustration that never goes anywhere. That doesn't disappear, it gets stored. And stored load becomes saturation. Saturation, as you know, at this point, can feel like less patience, less joy, less clarity, less capacity for anything. Not like collapsing, not, contraction. You just become narrower, more efficient, less alive. And for some women, if nothing shifts, the body will force a pause, and not as a sense of punishment, but as more of like protection. Because an electrical system cannot hold an indefinite amount of charge without there being a consequence. And like that's physics. Midlife is often the moment where your body is just like, we are not carrying this forward, right? Like it's so intelligent that it just puts the brakes on it and says, all right, this is your signal to restructure this thing because it's no longer optional and we cannot continue to carry the load of this. Because real recalibration is subtle. It's not about like going and blowing up your life. It's again this redistribution. You're like, you're just gonna hear me say this forever. It's the moment where you don't answer that person, okay? You just don't. Not immediately, not ever, maybe. You don't smooth reflexively. You don't absorb everyone's tension, and it's letting that silence stretch out a little longer. It's letting friction just be there. It's allowing responsibility to find its rightful place without you gripping it. Like this doesn't have to look dramatic. It can look steady, it can look strategic, but here's what's happening underneath. Your nervous system will begin to reorganize. And when we work through the lens of the bioenergetic somatics and tuning, we're not trying to fix somebody's personality, we're restoring coherence. The nervous system is electrical. You know that your heart emits a frequency. The body gets to reorganize around this beautiful pattern. And when stored charge discharges, when vigilance softens, when coherence returns, courage doesn't have to be manufactured or living on willpower. It gets to emerge in a beautiful, non performative, non aggressive, steady way because you feel lighter. You feel less responsible. You feel like having to carry all that crap isn't yours alone. You get to feel clearer, not because forced clarity, just because there's less noise in your system. You get to feel integrated, less scattered, more precise, more decisive. And this is where everything changes. So, you get to say no. You get to ask for reciprocity. You get to like raise your own standard and stop over explaining yourself and leaking energy into rooms that never fed you. It's beautiful alignment. And this is what I love to call leadership. It's not about dominance, it's not about control. This is self trust. A woman powerful in her own skin, making decisions without feeling braced. She's magnetic because her energy is coherent, grounded, and she is not performing strength. She literally is strength. That is force. If this conversation brought a specific topic and or a moment to mind for you, maybe it was like the dinner or a bill, a holiday, just a moment where you swallowed some frustration. That is not random. That's awareness beginning to resurface. And awareness is the beginning of your recalibration. You are not selfish for wanting a little more balance in your life or overly dramatic because you're beginning to notice the cost all of this has had on you. You are not difficult for beginning to shift. You are literally reorganizing. And yes, recalibration feels uncomfortable before it ever feels aligned. But as it's destabilizing, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. It means the structure is beginning to shift. And if this work resonated, please stay with this. These conversations build one on top of the other. You can subscribe here on YouTube, follow along with 100 days of the tide check. Those are simple daily nervous system drops, recalibrating moments that I share daily. And if you want to go deeper, the Inner Tide lives over on Patreon. All of that is below. You can also get my 3-day reorientation where it's like beautiful emails sent to you to put language to this work. And if there's a woman in your life who is strong, who is capable, who is dependable, she's quietly stretched, please, please send this to her. Not as like a correction, more as a recognition like, hey, girl, I see you. We do not have to carry this alone anymore. And as always, remember who you came here to be. Until next time, my friends, take care.